This morning I spoke of the child of God as a sheep. This evening I'd like to change the analogy and speak of the child of God as a mule. The scene isn't quite as attractive, but it's as realistic as the matter of a sheep. As a matter of fact, there's a psalm that says, "Don't be as the stubborn mule who needs a bit and bridle to keep it in line." Don't be like the mule. Have in mind our problem of being stubborn when God speaks. Remember, we closed the message last Sunday evening with 3 erroneous reactions to the voice of God. To begin with, we have the problem of running before we are sent. That's brought on because of our intense nature, because of our anxious desire, often to get the job done our way. So before we're sent, we're running ahead. This leads inevitably to failure. And so the next reaction to God's voice is to retreat after we have failed. This is because of insecurity. We are in the cult of success in our society. We don't know how to handle failure. Once we fail, we look for the closest place to hide and the darkest spot so we'll not be noticed by anyone else, and we plan to retire there because we fail. And then when God's voice comes again and he speaks to the birds with broken pinions and plans to use us again, we resist when we are called. You know that there are all 3 activities going on among children of God. And not all of that is going on outside this building. Some of you tonight are engaged in one of those 3 erroneous acts: running ahead, retreating, or resisting. Resisting is often brought about because of an inferiority. We feel that we simply are not the best qualified for the job. We really do not feel worthy for the task. We have a record of failure, and so when God comes and puts his finger in our face and says, "You're my choice," often the reaction is resistance. I've made a mess of it before, and I just cannot go through that again. So we're stubborn, we resist. This occurred to me the other evening when my 5-year-old son brought his shoe to me, which he had gotten in a knot. Nobody can get a shoe in a knot like little Chucky. And his approach in getting the knot out is to pull the strings harder. Rather than bringing it to me earlier, he brings it later. And the knot is so tiny and it is so tight that it takes an act of God to get the knot undone. And I've told him time and time again, "Son, when you pull the strings and it won't open up like it's supposed to," and he's looking at me and batting those eyes, "don't pull harder. Come get me." And he says, "I think I can get it out. That's why I pull harder." I've thought about that the balance of this week, and that's the way it is with the child of God. We get into the knot, and we will not admit that it is a self-made knot, and we pull harder and harder until it takes an act of God to get us out of it. Came across this interesting piece. "With thoughtlessness and impatient hands, we tangle up the plans the Lord hath wrought. And when we cry in pain, he says, 'Be quiet, my child, while I untie the knot.'" And that's what God wanted to do with Moses. His life had been one great knot of self-effort, hard, sincere labor in the energy of the flesh. And it had gotten so tangled and enlarged and complicated that finally he retreated to the desert, where he stayed for 40 years, until one great day, God caused a bush to burst aflame. And from that burning bush, God spoke to Moses. And he said, in effect, Moses, I want to use you again. And then began the problem of the mule. Moses had been resistant for 40 years. He had been licking his wounds so that when God finally came, Exodus chapter 3, verse 10, and addressed Moses with a direct, simple call, Moses couldn't handle it. Let's look at that passage together, shall we? Moses said, in effect, who? Me, Lord? But before we look at his excuses, let's consider the call. Exodus 3:10. God is speaking. I want you to notice how simple and direct and clear it is. Therefore, come now. I will send you to Pharaoh so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Now that wasn't complicated, was it? He spoke in a tongue that Moses understood. He gave a simple, twofold command. First, he said to Moses, I will send you. And second, he said, you will bring my people out. That's the plan. I want you to notice that it was not a multiple choice arrangement. It was not even an invitation. It was a call. God does not speak and ask our advice regarding his plan. God makes declarations. He doesn't open up the scene for a rap session or a dialogue. God says to us at very unique junctures of our lives, now I have this in mind for you. I know that you have knotted things up in the past, and I know that you, being sheep, will knot things up in the future. But as for today, right now, this is my plan for you. Moses, go. I will deliver Egypt. I will deliver Israel from Egypt's bondage. Now, Moses was resistant. I am convinced in my heart, having pondered over this for some time, because Moses thought he had to be the deliverer. God never told him that. God told him that he was to be the instrument of deliverance, but God would be the deliverer. There's a difference. In God's calling, he has a plan, and he never expects you to be the one to carry out the plan. He's going to carry it out, but he wants you to be the instrument of action. You see, his reputation is at stake, not yours. All he asks is that you be a vessel, an instrument that he can use, and that's all. Moses didn't get that. You'll notice his resistance is in immediate, verse 11. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? Wait a minute, Moses. You didn't get the plan. All you have to do is be in the right place at the right time and watch God work. It's marvelous. You just have a heart that's prepared. You be sure that you're walking in obedience with me, and you watch me deliver those Israelites out of Egypt. He said, Lord, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Now, it sounds on the surface as if it's a humble plan. Look, for example, at his reaction, verse 11. Who am I that I should go? That sounds nice and humble, doesn't it? But as a matter of fact, it's a question that is inappropriate. Moses should have responded, Lord, I am available. I am flammable like this bush. If you wish to burn me out, I'm ready to go. And then God responds to Moses with a rather direct statement. Look at verse 12. Moses, I will be with you. This shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. What mountain? Verse 1, Mount Sinai. If you were to travel to Mount Sinai tonight and take a scale and measure that great, massive mountain of gray stone, you would see that it stands some 8,000 feet above the earth. I suggest at this moment Moses stood back and he looked up and he saw that sheer mountain, and a funny feeling went over him, because God said, Moses, the sign that you can count on will be that when you lead those people out of Egypt and you come right back to this mountain, you're going to come to worship me with them by your side. I believe Moses knew in his heart he was a goner. He couldn't talk God out of that plan. Ever tried to talk God out of a plan? It's the most frustrating experience I know anything about. You think you're persistent. I think Chucky is persistent. You ought to work with God. You ought to work for God. That's even harder. I'll tell you, when he gives you his plan, there's no alternative. And you know something else? His choice often seems so illogical. Honestly now, would you have chosen Jonah to be the evangelist at Nineveh? Not on your life. Not on your life. Neither would you have chosen Moses, 80 years old, and he's over the hill. He's been driving sheep for 40 years. He's lost his touch with people. The only thing he knows how to interpret is the bleat of a sheep. He's been raising a little family, living with his father-in-law, hasn't even had enough money to build his own place. He seems like a very unlikely suspect for that job, doesn't he? That's the way he felt. You know something? That's the way you feel. But God says men don't look at people like I look at people. Men and women look at their outward appearance, but I look on their heart. I look to find qualities that are very, very significant that I can use, and then I make that choice because they've got those qualities. Let me show you a verse that proves that. First, that is 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. 2 Chronicles 16:9. I can see the dust blowing up from the pews this evening as you are trying to find 2 Chronicles 16. We don't read much in this section of the Bible, do we? I have a close friend that refers to the Chronicles and the Kings as the pots and pans section of the Bible. It's a part we don't spend much time in. But there are some rich truths here. Look at verse 9, 2 Chronicles 16:9. The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth. Why? Well, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. Mark that verse. Mark it well. You will be able to use that verse in the lives of some others that will come to you for counsel or encouragement or in your own life. God's eyes move to and fro to find people whose hearts are just right for a task. And then when he finds them, watch out. He gets you into the stream of action. You see, Moses did not view himself as God did. And so he was like the mule. He was stubborn. Back to Exodus chapter 3, let's look at some of the excuses that he brought, trying to convince God that he really wasn't the man. Verse 13 is excuse number 1. Let's use these words to describe the excuse. I will not have all the answers. That's the excuse. Lord, I'm not the man because I will not have all the answers. Now let's read the verse. Moses said to God, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. Now they may say to me, what is his name? Lord, I don't have that answer. What shall I say to them? Before I look at the answer God gave, I want you to think about the excuse. It's very, very often, it's often used by Christians today. I can't do that because I'll get in a corner and I won't know how to handle it. I'll appear ridiculous and foolish in the eyes of other people if I do that. I can't do that, Lord. I won't have all the answers. Remarkable thing about God's Word, I never read that we have to have all the answers. Why do we feel we must have all the answers? Stop and think about this just from a practical point of view. Some of you are older and you have to think back to the days when you were in school. Others of you are engaged right now in your academic pursuit. Remember those times that you got the professor in a corner and you knew that he didn't know the answer and he wouldn't admit it? What did you do? Well, chances are, if you were like most people, you began to bear down and bear down until you began to saw him off on the end of the limb with a set of facts. Because there is something inside of us that wants the other person to simply admit, I don't know. I have never lost respect for anyone who said, I don't know. But I really have lost respect for those that just won't say it. Look, remember this morning? You have nothing to prove, so you have nothing to lose. That's why it's good to be a sheep. Just basically dumb. Basically. Why do we have to have the answers? Because of pride. Pride says, if you don't have the answer, they'll laugh at you. But you know, intelligent people won't. God said to Moses when he answered, I won't have all the answers. God said, but you will have all of me. What's more important, Moses? Look at how God handles him. They're going to say, who is this God that you're referring to? Well, Moses, tell them this. Verse 14. Tell them, I am has sent me. You shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. What does that mean? English readers of an English Bible go across that and wonder why in the world that was significant. It seemed to satisfy Moses. Well, these words are the translation of the very characters in Hebrew that spell out Jehovah. Moses, the self-existing one, the only infinite being, the only self-existent being in all of the universe, he has dispatched you. You represent him. I am has sent you. You tell him that. Furthermore, the word Jehovah is the most intimate term for the living Lord known to the Jew. Moses, when you stand before them, you let them know that the intimate God of Israel has dispatched you to be his representative. And Moses, I give you two promises. Look at verse 18. Promise number one, they will pay heed to what you say. Promise number two, verse 20. I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles. The verse closes, and after that, he will let you go. Promise number two, they will let the people of the Hebrews go. they will believe you, Moses. And second, they will let the people go. You've got my promise to stand on. I won't let you down, Moses. You feel like you don't have all the answers? Oh, but Moses, you'll have all of me. You represent I am, and you represent my promises. Now let's see what Moses did with God's promise. Verse 1 of chapter 4. Then Moses answered, what if they will not believe me or listen to what I say? Are you ready? Excuse number 2. I may not have all their respect. Here he fears ridicule. He lacks prestige. And he says, Lord, I'm going to go back like an old desert shepherd, 80 years old, and I'm going to walk into that sophisticated culture of Egypt, and I'm going to walk up before Pharaoh, the ruler of the land, and with my staff in my hand, and this crummy outfit that I've been wearing all these years, I'm going to go as your representative, and I'm going to effect the Exodus. What if they won't believe me? I may not have all their respect. It's not any fun to feel foolish in front of people, is it? Let's face it. You could be Moses. You could be the Apostle Paul, or whoever else you may wish to name, and it's not fun to feel foolish, and that's what he was afraid of. He was afraid of their ridicule. But I want you to notice what he had ignored. I just want to read the 2 verses together. Go back to verse 18, chapter 3. Moses, they will pay heed to what you say. Now verse 1. But Lord, what if they do not pay heed to what I say? Get the idea? It's an open denial of the promise of God. Moses, when you go, they're going to listen. But Lord, what if when I go, they won't listen? Now, it might be strong of me to make this statement, but I think God must have shook his head there for a moment. Didn't he hear what I just said? But you see, Moses is a mule right now. You can't reason with a mule. God said, Moses, you will have all my power. That's my answer. Moses said, I may not have all their respect. God says, yes, but remember what I promised? You will have all my power. Let me show you Moses' excuse. First of all, it's totally hypothetical. It begins with the words, what if? Those are the words of worriers. Every worrywart in the family of God lives on those 2 words. What if? Because we worry most often about what if such and such occurs, right? Right. You don't want to admit that, but that's true. Many people feed their minds on the uncertainty of tomorrow, and they build a case on what if. That's what Moses was doing. He was picturing in his mind walking over into the land of Egypt and standing up in front of Pharaoh before all of those, guards and all of that beauty of that court, and he thought, oh, I won't have their respect. So God says, let me show you what I'm able to do. Verse 2. What is that in your hand? He said, it's a staff. He said, throw it on the ground. He threw it on the ground, became a snake. Moses fled from it. The Lord said to Moses, wait a minute, Moses, stretch out your hand and grasp it by the tail. So he stretched it out, and he grabbed that snake by the tail, and it became a staff in his hand. Boy, don't you know he was relieved at that moment? That snake turned back into a staff. God stopped him in his tracks and said, look, Moses, I'm able to turn a staff into a snake and back into a staff. And that's something in your hand. I don't give you clever little plastic boxes to do little tricks with when you go before Pharaoh. Man, I could use a staff. Take your hand there, Moses. Stick it in your garment, it says in that passage. Verse 6, put your hand into your bosom. And so he put it inside his robe, just like this. Just put it inside his garment. And then it says, pull it out again. He put it out, and it says his hand was as leprous. It was as white as snow. Think of that. He looked at his own hand, and it was leprous, most dreaded of all diseases. And God said, put it back in your garment. He put it back inside and pulled it out again, and the flesh was just like new. Verse 7 says he restored it like the rest of his flesh. Remarkable, huh? God said, oh, that's nothing, Moses. You may not have their respect just as Moses, but you wait till I start doing it in their midst. If I can turn the staff into a snake, you know, Moses, I can turn the river Nile into blood. I can bring lice, I can bring locusts, I can bring grasshoppers, I can flood the land of Egypt with whatever I please, Moses. All I ask is that you just go and say the word and then just get out of the way. Oh man, that makes me excited just to think about being Moses. But you know, he still wasn't convinced. Even though God said, I know you may not have all their respect as you think of it, but you've got all my power. Moses said, but no, wait a minute, Lord. Verse 10. Now he starts to plead. Oh, this is so relevant. This is so practical. Please, Lord. Those words sound familiar? Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since thou hast spoken to thy servant. I'm slow of speech and I'm slow of tongue. You know what that means? It means, Lord, I don't get thoughts very quickly. And then once I get them, I don't say them in the correct way. I'm slow in my expressions. Some of you could identify quickly with that problem. You say, oh, I get in front of a group and I'm just all teeth and lips. I can't even say it. I would be scared to death to stand up in front of the group of Hebrews and say something as a representative of God. I'm not eloquent. And even though I get a good thought every week or so in my head, I can't get it out when the thought comes. That's Moses. Man, I've been driving these woolies all over the desert for 40 years, Lord. All I know is bad, bad, bad. That's all I can say. And you want me to stand up in front of the educated Pharaoh. I'm not eloquent. I have a friend who took a Dale Carnegie course, and I wish he were here to tell it. It's Howard Hendricks. He says that when he took the course, well, he was a teacher of the course, actually. There were two men in the course that were so terribly afraid that one man literally hid under his desk when it was his turn to go up front and to say his little piece. One guy, every time it came his turn, dismissed himself to go to the bathroom. Every time it was his turn. He just couldn't face getting up in front of a group. That's the way Moses felt. He had lost the knack. You ever feel like that? The excuse is, Lord, I do not have all the ability. I'm not able to carry through. I can't cope with that kind of assignment. I can't speak in public. Let me show you something about the Apostle Paul. It's going to surprise you. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Now, just the mention of the Apostle Paul puts into the minds of most Christians the prima donna of public speaking. Most people feel that he must have swept a city like Napoleon or Alexander the Great. Why, he came in and founded churches just with the snapping of his fingers. So eloquent, so able. No, that's not true. If I read 1 Corinthians chapter 2 correctly, I don't find him like that. When I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God. The context is worldly wisdom. I didn't come with that suave, that swagger, that scintillating approach that the Greeks love and hang on among those eloquent speakers, those orators. I wasn't like that. Verse 3, here's the way I was. I was with you in weakness, in fear, in much trembling. Can you believe that? The Apostle Paul, so nervous, one knee said to the other, let's shake. You know? You could just hear them knocking underneath his robe. Can you believe that? That's the Apostle Paul. You expect him, to just take charge just like a pro. That's not Paul. He was with them in fear, in trembling. As a matter of fact, verse 4 says, his message and his preaching were not even in persuasive words of wisdom, but they were a demonstration of the power of God. Why? Why didn't God choose an eloquent vessel in the Apostle Paul? Verse 5, that the faith of those churches might not rest in man's wisdom, but on the power of God. When the Apostle Paul finished, people had met God. When he walked away, they had heard from God. When he wrote the document to begin the church, it was as if God's hand had written it. I have a small work entitled The Acts of Paul and Thecla. Not an inspired document, but written by one who claims he knew the Apostle Paul. And the appearance of Paul, as he describes it in the book, is most unusual. He was not tall and handsome. He was short and stubby. He had black, bushy hair, bushy eyebrows. He had poor eyesight, and he squinted when he read. He was humped over and even spoke with a stammer. It's not our picture of Paul, is it? Why, we have the idea that he was as Demosthenes. He was not. You see, Moses, like we, had that concept of a leader. Of a leader. If you're going to be a leader, you can't miss a word. And now look at what God says to Moses. Moses, I hear what you're saying. Verse 12. Now you go, Moses, and I, even I, will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what you are to say. That's divine speech therapy. I will be right on your lips, I will be right on your tongue, and I will give you just the words right when you need them. You know what I've discovered about the Lord? The Lord does not give us wisdom on credit. The Lord does not give us words on credit, nor insight on credit. You know when he gives us words and wisdom and insight? Right when we need them. At the moment they're needed. Parents feel that is true when they raise their children, and at those very meaningful junctures where the right comment has to come across, how often it comes even beyond our wisdom. And we look back and say, thanks, Lord, that's exactly what needed to be said. But you could not have planned that had you been the wisest of the wise. You see, Moses, I will be with your mouth, and I will give you the very words when they are needed. Isn't that a beautiful plan? But it demands faith. God said, I want you to be willing to trust me, Moses. I'll be with your lips. Now, verse 13 seems like a statement that's tantamount to, I'm ready to go. But it's not. It's the fourth excuse. Our Bible reads, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever thou wilt. It sounds like he's saying, Lord, choose your instrument. If it's me, we're ready to go. But that's not what he's saying. The Revised Standard Version renders it, send, I pray, some other person. The Living Bible renders it, Lord, please send someone else. The Berkeley Bible is the best. Oh Lord, please send anyone else. Lord, I'm not as qualified as all others. That's the fourth excuse. I will not have all the answers. I may not have all their respect. I do not have all the ability. And Lord, I'm not as qualified as all the rest. Oh, that land of Egypt is shot through with capable people that know that culture. They know that style, and they can move in and handle that job. Lord, you're picking on a desert dweller. I haven't been there for 40 years. I don't even know my way around. There's so many others more qualified than I. Ever feel like that? The Lord puts his finger at you, and you say, "Who, me? Oh, but look at the fellow next to me. Man, he's got his degree in that. He's at 13 years, he was with this club that taught him how to speak. Man, he speaks great. Does it wonder. He's good family raised. I've got little children. I'm not, it's where my time has to be spent. Look at that person, so much more qualified. Or look at her. Oh, prayer warrior, 13 years Bible study fellowship. Man, she's Jesus' assistant. Terrific person, very capable. Don't pick on me, Lord. She's much better than I. Past president of WMF. She's been in this church, 10, 12, 15 years. She's the one, Lord, not me. Look at her ability. And the Lord comes back and says, "But you are my choice." That's his answer. You see, if you think you are persistent, you haven't done business with God lately. He doesn't give up. He says, "I'm not quitting." Now, I want you to notice in verse 14 how he loses his patience. Remember, you had parents, perhaps, like I did, that were patient up to a point. And from that point on, they were not patient at all. That's where God is, right here in verse 14. It says, "The anger of the Lord burned against Moses, and he said, 'Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite?'" I know that he speaks fluently. "And moreover, behold, he's coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he'll be glad in his heart." This is the tone that God must have used. "And you're to speak to him and put the words in his mouth. But I will be with your mouth and his mouth. I will teach you what you are to do. Moreover, he will speak for you to the people. It shall come about that he shall be as a mouth for you, but you shall be as a God to him. You shall take in your hand this staff with which you will perform the signs." You know what God did? He accommodated Moses' desire, but it was less than the best. Aaron proved to be an albatross around his neck. Aaron built the golden calf. Those people said, "Look, let's go back to Egypt. Man, that's where the food is. That's where the fun is. What are we doing out here in the middle of the wilderness?" God accommodated Moses' plan, but it was sure less than the best. I want to say something right here that needs to be said. Some of you are being led by God to step out by faith in a plan that seems treacherous. You don't have all the answers. It seems rather bleak from a human point of view. Do you know what the tendency on our part is to do? It's to take somebody else with us. That saves us. That keeps us from having to trust fully. We can trust partially and have a friend along, How many men have gone in business in partnership and lived to curse the day they chose that partner? How many women are engaged in pursuits right now with a companion they long since wish they'd never chosen? There's something very independent about God's calling and his plan, and you be absolutely certain before you pick and choose a team that you've got the same vision beating in the heart of that other person, or you go it alone. Moses, I'll send Aaron, but boy, I'll send leanness into your soul. Now, there's a very human response on Moses' part. I just got to share it, even though it goes into next Sunday night. I'll share it and then we're through. Look at his response, verse 18. It's so practical. Moses departed, returned to Jethro, his father-in-law. And notice what he said to his father-in-law. He's still not convinced. Please, Dad, let me go, that I may return to my brethren who are in Egypt and see if they are still alive. No, that's not what God said to do, Moses. But, God is so gracious. He doesn't knock it off, Moses. Tell him the truth. God doesn't do that. Moses says, Jethro, I'm going to go see if all my buddies are still alive. And Jethro says, fine, peace be with you. Take off. Sort of like that, said something like that. And Moses left, but he just didn't have the full faith to say, Jethro, I'm going to lead an exodus. He just couldn't say that. So God let him by. Let him off. Isn't that good? God's like that. All he wants you to be is willing. That's all he asks. He doesn't expect you to have all the answers, to have all the ability. He doesn't even expect you to have the power. He just asks you to be available and flammable and to burn up for him. I began with 3 statements regarding God's voice. I want to close with 3. They relate to the matter of responding positively. Once you've quit resisting, here's what you need to do. First, be certain it's God's voice. Be certain you're hearing God's voice. Many people feel they are in a pursuit for God's glory that God has nothing to do with. They're on a lark. They've got some unfulfilled desire, some adventurous spirit that they're calling God's will. They've not heard God's voice. God's voice can be screened through the Word of God. He's given us 66 books, the printed page called His Word, and it'll never lead you astray. He's given you wise counselors, friends, acquaintances, parents, teachers, those that you love and respect. Screen what you call the will of God through their thoughts. Be very careful that it's God's voice that you're hearing. Be certain of that. And second, be confident in His power. Don't run aside and think, oh, I'm not powerful enough. You don't have to be powerful. He asks you to be a vessel, a clay pot in which He can house His power. So be confident in His power. Doesn't ask you to be clever. He asks you to be confident in Him. And third, be comfortable with His plan. Don't alter it. Be comfortable with His arrangement. Don't throw in an errand and think it'll make the plan better. Go the hard way rather than a compromise. It'll be a better plan. I wrestled as I prepared this message with what does it mean to be willing? What does it mean to give up the old stubbornness of a mule, stop resisting and start giving in? What does that mean? Came across an anonymous piece that says it best. Listen carefully. Lord, I am willing. I am willing to receive what you give. I am willing to lack what you withhold. I am willing to relinquish what you take. I am willing to suffer what you inflict. I am willing to be what you require. That's how to stop resisting. I'm willing to receive what you give, lack what you withhold, relinquish what you take, suffer what you inflict, be what you require. May we bow together. God has spoken. But maybe you don't know the voice of the shepherd because you're not a sheep. You're willing to say, Lord, I'm willing to accept your Son as my Savior, my God. Jesus Christ died that you might have forgiveness, purpose, eternal life, power, inner healing and restoration, definition, destiny. But in order for you to have Jesus Christ, you must submit your will to His will. I am willing to ask Jesus Christ to come into my life. I want to do that right now. I also speak to those of you that are born again. But you become mule-like as a sheep, going your own way again. You're resisting His plan. It's not Aaron that's in your way, it's yourself. Just one excuse after another. And I want you to know that His love keeps Him from asking anything of you that's unfair. May seem illogical, but it's not unfair. Could be a very significant evening for some of you, and I think it will be, because we've met in His name and asked Him to speak to lives. You may be that life tonight.
The preceding message, Who, Me, Lord, was copyrighted in 1975, 1978, 1981, 1985, 1998, and 2024, and the sound recording was copyrighted in 2024 by Chuck Swindoll, Inc. All rights are reserved worldwide. Duplication of copyrighted material for commercial use is strictly prohibited.